Hello, my name is Max. I'm a research assistant and PhD student at the chair of integrated transport planning at Technische Universität Berlin. In the following minutes, I would like to talk about my ongoing research in urban cycling cultures in Berlin and present you some ideas what this might mean for sustainable cycling futures. I will start with a short introduction and then explain my research approach. I will then show you part of my empirical results, leading to the discussion what we could learn for sustainable cycling futures, and I will finish with some conclusions for cycling research and promotion. As I said, my research is grounded in my PhD project, which is still running for one more year, therefore please consider any results, interpretations, or recommendations as preliminary. Cycling is becoming more important in urban and transport planning due to its many benefits. And cycling is also getting more visible in urban landscapes and popular cultures. To create bicycle utopias and sustainable mobility cultures, we need a comprehensive transformation of the transport system. In Germany, we call this Verkehrswende. But the Verkehrswende also needs a fundamental cultural shift and a renegotiation of existing structures, beliefs, lifestyle, identities, and attitudes. And in this context, culture can either act as a stabilizer of dominant lifestyle and concepts, but also as a motor of change. Here are my research questions. What role does culture play in mobility and transportation? How do urban cycling cultures present themselves? What practices and meanings go along? Which actors are involved and what do they want? What differences and similarities become apparent? And how can this be contextualized and understood? And what does urban cycling cultures mean? What do they mean for future sustainable mobility? And in the end, what role might a cultural change play in the Verkehrswende? In order to answer these questions, I've chosen a qualitative research design based on ethnography that aims to explore, understand, and theorize on social-cultural phenomena. Ethnographic research is a particularly strong sub-area of qualitative research and is understood as applied cultural studies, which aims for a description of foreign and own cultural practices and ways of life. And this description is fundamentally based on own experience and explorations. Ethnography often uses different research methods. My main method is participant observation, but this is supplemented by ethnographic interviews, selected document and media analysis, and concluding qualitative interviews. So the method of participant observation means that the researcher alternates between participation and observation. And the practice of field research, this also means meeting and talking with a lot of people, specific actors, and witnessing certain events, learning practices by oneself, and become familiar with different perspectives, meanings, and objects. In the context of my research, I of course consider myself as a researcher primarily. But many insights and experiences I collected as an activist and entrepreneur and also as a private individual who likes riding bikes, let it be commuting, recreational cycling, or sport cycling. And this sometimes means conflicting agendas, different perspectives, and interpretations. For example, as an activist, I think that deviant riding is a structural effect of the automobile system and liminality of cycling. But as a hobby sport cyclist and also as an everyday commuter, I really think that there need to be some rules, as many cyclists do not hold their line or do not use hand signs and make it dangerous also for other cyclists and road users. So, in the end, as a researcher, I try to combine both perspectives, contextualize, and synthesize them. In Germany, the importance of cycling as a mode of transport has increased significantly over the past 15 years and is becoming more and more popular. Especially young urbanites aged between 14 and 29 use the bicycle, as do progressive and affluent social milieus. And this is very important from my perspective because cycling was long stigmatized as a children's toy or as the transport mode for the poor, for greenies, or for punks. And cycling was not only subordinated to the car in terms of traffic planning, but also symbolically and culturally. And I have the feeling that this is now largely changing. Berlin often has the public image of a rather cycling friendly city for outsiders. However, while cycling has increased significantly in recent years, modal share is now about 18% and even much more in inner city areas, cycling related infrastructure and services have not been expanded accordingly, and cycling growth has little to do with governmental interventions. Due to the vast work and promotion of cycling initiatives, and especially the Volksentscheid Fahrrad, the city is now facing a large-scale infrastructural transformation, which has been politically agreed on in Berlin's new mobility law in 2018. Additionally, Berlin has a very vivid cycling culture, with hundreds of cycling shops, well-known trade fairs, races, and many more ambitious cycling initiatives. When you look at cycling practices and meanings that are being reproduced and distributed within cycling cultures, you will see a huge diversity and heterogeneity. You easily forget when you just talk about cyclists and cycling. While the bicycle is one of the most simple and minimalistic forms of transportation there is, it is also a highly developed, diverse, and individualized object that caters to many different users and users whose variety is not to be underestimated. So, one of my goals, therefore, is to explore this diversity, but with a focus on postmodern and young urban cycling cultures. So, for some people, cycling is still a way to get from A to B, let it be in recreational cycling or commuting. But for others, it's much more than that. It's a lifestyle based on identification, making friends, and having adventures. It's a sport where you have to show commitment, blood, sweat, and tears. For others, it's a subculture based on certain styles, rituals, and shared meanings. And for others, it's a political project, a tool to create livable cities and visions of sustainable transportation. And for others, it's a reason to consume, to buy fancy bikes and outfits, or to even become an influencer on social media. So, this list is not complete, and of course, there are many intersectionalities between. In my empirical research, I started focusing on Berlin's Fixke scene as well as on cycling initiatives, and from there explored other sports and fields as well. Now, I want to give you a brief overview of how Fixke cycling developed within the last years. And for me, this is still an illustrative case because it shows how cycling practices and meanings have been reproduced and distributed by various actors, and in some cases have left a more professional and subcultural context being implemented in postmodern consumer cultures and popular cultures. So, very roughly speaking, the Fixke bicycle as we know it today has its origins in track cycling and wasn't used on urban streets for a long time. Then, in the 1980s, bike messengers in the US started using track bikes on urban streets. Fixed gear bikes were cheap, light, fast, and easy to maintain, and had no extra part that could be stolen. However, besides these practical issues, riding brakeless in dense urban traffic presents a symbolic statement in and of itself. Riders show their skills, power, fearlessness, and deviant attitude. So it's a symbolic marker. And this is the major reason why hipsters adopted the symbols, practices, and insignia of the messenger subculture in order to show off and gain distinction. So that, quote, the Fixke bike has become a trendy icon of urban coolness, unquote, as Zach Furness already stated in 2010. So within the last 10 to 15 years, you probably came across some of the following examples. Hipsters that ride Fixke bikes, wear messenger bags or ride carbon road bikes. People who store their bicycles in their living room, hanging them like posters on the wall. Bicycle-related accessories, as well as fashion clothing that mainly focus on aesthetics and design while still maintaining functional requirements. Or cycling cafes where people meet to work, eat, drink, or go on group rides. Media representations in newspapers, films, and advertisement in which the bicycle is celebrated as a hip or sustainable mode of transport. And these are all developments that are directly or indirectly connected to fixed gear culture and show a further commercialization and symbolic revaluation that indicates for me that cycling is more and more perceived as hip and wanted in different contexts. In this respect, I think that cycling is the pioneer of the Verkehrswende. The elements I just showed you mean there's a higher symbolic and emotional motivation for cycling that may equal more cycling in other target groups as well. And there's an increasing public awareness and visibility as well as changing discourses. There's also vast heterogeneity of cycling initiatives, subcultures, practices, and meanings that further differentiate and specialize urban cycling. And most importantly, in Berlin, they are changing transport policies and even a mobility law, including much better cycling infrastructure, which leads to a huge critical and transformative potential for sustainable cycling futures. But this still comes at a price. Cycling gets more and more exclusive and privileged. It's mainly male, mainly white, mainly expensive, mainly urban, mainly self identifying cyclists, mainly fit cyclists, and so forth. So, there are many critical researchers, mainly from the US and UK context, who describe this problem in more detail. And I think one of the problems for cycling promotion is that potential cyclists have to be addressed to really make cycling more inclusive, safe, and attractive for many people. But at least my research shows that most of urban cycling cultures are shaped by self identifying cyclists. So, in consequence, cultural representations, practices, designs, and even cycling policies follow their logic and their needs. This is being a huge part of the problem. And I think this is especially relevant in the fields of sport cycling, cycling subcultures, but even within cycling initiatives. And many cycling cultures are nowadays also very much based in postmodern consumer cultures and flexible accumulation. So they might be very profit oriented and market driven. And for example, take cycling influencers on social media as an example. Like most of them are sponsored by different bicycle brands, and the key objective is to show, test, and advertise products, often without really showing this. Sustainable cycling futures, they have origins and visions, but they also show a lot of uncertainties and path dependencies. And there are lots of everyday practices, materials, and meanings that are already lived, experienced, and refined today. And I think we need to further focus on them. In terms of cycling research, this might mean that we need to explore and further understand these cultural phenomena to deduce proper instructions. And this calls for qualitative and explorative approaches, as well as cycling research being rooted in social and cultural sciences. And I know this is already happening in the UK and in the US since many years now, but in Germany I find it still very rare. For example, the current cycling professorships by the German Federal Ministry for Transport, they are all very technical, mostly being grounded in engineering, economics, and more traditional and quantitative transport planning approaches. Instead, I believe we need more holistic approaches, meaning trans and interdisciplinary projects, which is sort of the combining element of research and cycling promotion. In terms of cycling promotion, I think that this needs to go beyond creating appropriate infrastructure, also focusing more on creating alternative meanings and readings and products and in media representations in cultural production and bike industry, and especially the field of sports, which needs to become much more inclusive and inviting for many people. And it also has to focus on empowerment, on teaching newcomers how to bike and get people interested in biking who now do not have any access to it, let it be due to social, economic, or cultural constraints. And do not get me wrong, appropriate cycling infrastructure is, of course, a key element, but in the case of Berlin, I would argue that we now have to focus more on all the other things that we rather left untouched for the last years. In this sense, thank you very much for your time and interest. If you have any questions, I'm happy to respond. All the best and see you soon. Goodbye.